What are the 6 most common case interview types in consulting and how to solve them? Hi, my name is Johannes Niari. I'm a project manager in strategy consulting, and on this channel, I want to help you to learn the necessary skills that you need for your first years in consulting. And today, I want to talk about the 6 most common consulting case interview types that help you to ace the case and get the offer. Well, you know that probably every case is very individual and every case study that you do is unique. Nevertheless, I can tell you based on my own experience, there are certain cases that repeat in certain case types that repeat over and over again. So when I started preparing for cases back then, when I wanted to join the consulting industry, I literally worked through every consulting casebook that was out there. I took courses about that, and I also did many one-on-one mentorings. And nowadays, as a project manager, I'm also involved in a recruiting process and do a lot of case interviews. And I can tell you that there are certain types of case studies that repeat over and over again. And if you really prepare for those certain types, this really helps you to build some frameworks, to build some approaches, to get used to the common questions that are asked in such cases. And this significantly increases the chances to get the offer and to ace the case. So with that being said, let's jump into the 6 most common case interview types. And I also always will answer 4 questions. I first will talk about the main question that they might ask you. Second, I will talk about possible topics that you could explore throughout the process. I talk about frameworks that you can use in order to solve the case, and I will give an example what the solution of such a case could look like. So with that being said, let's jump into the first type of case studies. And these are profitability cases. And this is by far the most common type that you will see in consulting interviews. And what would be a typical question for these types of case studies? The typical scenario is that a company wants to become more profitable, and the interviewer will ask you to find ways to increase profitability. So what are certain topics that you could investigate? So maybe you could identify some reasons for the decreasing profits. Also, you could identify some ways to increase profits. You could take a look at some short-term measures versus long-term measures. You could also say you'd explore internal versus external reasons. These are some topics that you could investigate throughout the process, depending on the question that the interviewer asks you. So what are common frameworks that you use in such cases? Of course, you have your profitability tree. So this means profit is revenue minus cost, and below that you have all the cost positions. Then you have, if you talk about revenue, you have quantity times price, and then you can split it further up. So this is the basic framework that you need and that you apply in such cases. But you also could use other frameworks, like for example, the P&L statement. If you want to also include some other positions, you could also talk about internal external factors. Supply demand curve would be a framework that you could use as well. Frameworks about fixed and variable costs, and also economies of scale or scope. This could be also things that you could explore. So what would be a typical example for such a case? So an example could be that a packaging company, for example, wants to increase profitability, and they ask you about potential levers that they could apply. So what would be possible solutions? So you could ask maybe about cost cutting programs. You could talk about increasing revenue by launching new products. You could talk about a new pricing strategy. You could talk about an M&A program to increase economies of scale, stuff like that. Okay, there are many different options that you can explore in such cases, and that's also why they are so popular, because you can apply the wide range of consulting tools in such cases. Then the second case I want to talk about, and this is the most frequent use case, these are market entry cases. And the question here typically is that a company wants to enter the market, and the interviewer will ask you to explore if this makes sense or not. So what are relevant topics that you could explore throughout the interview process? So for example, you could explore market size and market growth. You could explore market segmentations. So how's the market structured? You could talk about market dynamics. So are there any movements in the market? You could talk about core competencies of the client. You could talk about required investments to enter the market, and much more. What are typical frameworks? Very classical frameworks for that are Porter's 5 forces, of course. Then you have the Ansoff matrix, you have BCG matrix, SWOT analysis. These are typical frameworks that you would use in such cases. So the example could be a European company wants to enter the Asian market. How would you assess the situation? And then you could go through the process and do a little market analysis, talk about market growth, market size, maybe segmentation. Is it fragmented? Is it very concentrated? How does your company fit into the market? Stuff like that. And then you could come to the evaluation and to the conclusion that it's not attractive because maybe there is high competition, maybe a lot of investments are required, maybe there is a lack of competencies within your client's firm. You could also say it's attractive because there is a high growth expected. Also, you have some competitive advantages that you can leverage in this market, or you have a unique positioning that you could achieve. So these are possible options. And again, these cases are very broad and very, very frequently used in consulting cases. Then the third type I want to talk about are product launch cases. And the question here would be that a company wants to launch a new product line and the interviewer would ask you, would you recommend that? Would that be profitable? And relevant topics that you could explore are, first of all the things from the market entry scenario as well, because those cases are pretty similar. But on top of that, you could talk about product features. You could talk about the demand analysis. You could explore a little bit product market fit. So does your product really meet the needs of the market? You could talk about product pricing, market entry strategies, and so on. What are typical frameworks? You could use the 4Ps, the 4 marketing Ps. You could talk about the BCG matrix. You could use the core competency framework. You could also use a supply and demand analysis. And a typical scenario would be that, for example, a startup wants to launch a new dating app. Would that be attractive? And then you could do some analysis. You could talk first about the market development, maybe the market growth, but then also do maybe a competitive analysis where do you take a look at some product features from some competitors in order to understand, okay, how could you position within that market? And then a typical solution could be, for example, you say it's not attractive to enter the market because there are high entry barriers like network effects that are already locked in. Maybe you also say, okay, the pricing is very competitive, so maybe it's even a low margin business if you can realize network effects, or you say it's a lack of product market fit because the market is already saturated. You could also say the market is very attractive because we still have increasing demand. Maybe you said, okay, we find a positioning that allows a unique product offering, or you said, okay, we go in with a new or very competitive pricing in order to get some market share. These could all be some possible solutions. Then let's talk about the fourth type. Let's talk about competitive response cases. And here the scenario is the following. Here the typical question is that that one of your competitors made a significant move and you are asked to answer for the client how the client should react on it. So what are relevant topics that you could explore? You could talk about market dynamics, of course. So you could explore, okay, how does this change the market dynamic? You could also say, okay, how is your company positioned? How is the competitor positioned? You could talk about also the value chain. So how does this impact the value chain, for example? And then explore, okay, how does this impact your profitability, for example? Typical frameworks are the 4 Cs. Again, the SWOT analysis, ABC analysis. Also, you could use a profitability analysis as well. So again, you can explore many, many different frameworks. So the example would be, for example, that a former supplier entered the core market of your client. And the question now is, how should you react? And there again are possible solutions. So maybe you recommend to set up a very aggressive pricing in order to fight against the competitor and to defend your market share. Also, you could say, okay, maybe you want to go for an alternative sourcing because it's a supplier of yours, and then this would hurt the supplier as well. Or you say, okay, you extend your product portfolio or try to find a new position in order to differentiate from the competition. Then the fifth type is the market trend case. And in this setting, you are asked the following question. Typically, the interviewer would say that a market is faced with a major challenge or a major change, like technology, for example. How should the client react? And things that you could explore then, typically you talk about technology trends, you talk about regulations, talk about consumer trends, stuff like that. So what is the change of the behavior? And then of course you try to explore a little bit how this would impact your client. So frameworks that you could use would, for example, be core competences. You could use a SWOT analysis and also a logic tree, to be a bit broader here, that you could also say, what kind of impact on what kind of aspects of my business does this decision really, really have. An example for that would be that a new digital technology is threatening to disrupt the market. How should your client react? And then possible solutions could be, okay, you invest in new technology, maybe you disrupt also your own business model or change your business model. This would also be an option. Or you do some protective moves in order to protect against that. For example, lobbying, trying to work together with associations to kind of protect yourself from this upcoming threat. And then the last case I want to talk about is case number 6. These are M&A cases, so mergers and acquisitions, and this is also frequently used. And here the question typically is, a company wants to acquire another company. Would that be a good move? Would that increase profitability? And relevant topics that you could explore in such cases would be, okay, would this create any kind of synergies between the companies? So would that be possible? Also, do you see any economies of scope or scale? So, the larger the company, the cheaper it is to produce, for example. Do you see, any positive moves in the market dynamic that this would create? So frameworks that you use is, for example, the SWOT analysis, value chain analysis, and again, profitability tree and P&L statement, where you go through all the cost positions and think about, okay, how would that impact the cost or the revenue positions. So an example for would be that a PE firm, so a private equity firm, wants to buy 2 packaging companies and merge them. How would you assess the situation? And then a possible solution could be that you recommend to do that because you can realize economies of scale. Maybe you have high synergies, maybe you have an increased market power. Or you say you don't recommend it because, for example, it requires too much investment. Maybe it's a difficult integration. Maybe, there are some market regulations that even forbid that merger. So this could also be a possible solution. So as you see, these are the 6 most common types of consulting case interviews that are used most frequently. And you see that, if you take a structured approach on these cases, you can kind of prepare for that scenario by walking through some cases, by using some frameworks. And in future videos, if you're interested, then please let me know in the comments below. I can talk about some cases. I can solve some cases with you here on YouTube where we go through such cases and explore how you would approach a market entry scenario, how you would approach a profitability case. So if you're interested in that, then please let me know in the comments below. Also, if you want to learn the necessary consulting skills that you need in your first year, also check the link below. There is a link to my online course. And with that being said, I wish you a very successful day. If you like the video, subscribe to it and also leave a thumb up. Hope to talk to you soon. Goodbye, Johannes.